I thought I take it you won.
Nope.
So once you set up okay, I'll just bring
I'm
you up
going
to
in
good
for round
audio.
3 tomorrow.
Are you trying to put a BSD on the Chromebook?
Yes.
Yep. Yep. You're right. Okay. Why? You like ARM? Is that what it is?
No, it's one of the essays. It's on the Caswell Chromebooks.
Oh. So what's the battle with this?
At first it was broken core boot.
Oh. Okay, not BSD's fault.
Which I tried to fix.
Blame water. Yes, you guess.
I
Much better as
I ended up having to flash like
text message
a core boot built with Core because I don't trust myself to build core boot and like not build a broken image.
Yeah, if you don't have JTAG hardware and stuff, yeah, it's probably a safe thing to use somebody else's tested image. But you were able to find a Tiana core boot for your Chromebook?
Yes.
Okay.
So
they're not shipping that with Tiana core, are they?
No, they ship it with like some half functional seal BIOS. Half functional because they don't actually use it. They use depth charge instead of Chrome OS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I took the button and I put a photoresistor in between the leads.
Okay, yeah.
So then I used LED to.
So what part of the battle did you lose today?
So I won having properly functioning video.
Right.
Now I still don't have a mouse, a working trackpad.
Hello, welcome. First time? Does it have a USB port? First time?
Yes.
Sweet. Welcome.
Yes.
Does the USB mouse work?
Probably, but I didn't have access to one.
My last
slides online.
My last go at a BSD
I was going to go through a lot of the website.
Oh, that's Samsung Chromebook ARM based.
Oh, I
know something.
I bought that Chromebook several years ago just to play with ARM, and it was
Then double check that.
it made me appreciate it.
Really?
Okay. Nothing worked right on it.
Michael has one of them, and I had it for a while because he couldn't get anywhere with it. I got far enough to get FreeBSD boot, but the keyboard would continuously repeat. As soon as you touched any key on it, it was that key forever, and there was no way to stop it. But I found out if you plug a USB keyboard in, you didn't touch that keyboard, it would work fine.
So apparently it's supposed you're supposed to be able to get the mouse to work, but
that internet thing.
all the resources I found were tested against like some 3-year-old version of 11th current.
There's a capture port. That's the other problem. Yep. And the world is people come along. They get it working on some specific version, and then drop it. And so people come along and break it by making other changes, and they don't have any way to either test that piece of hardware or simply are ignorant that their changes have far-reaching impacts. Back to Chromebook. You still have the little Samsung smell?
I'm sorry.
And I have it's yeah. So I do have a Chromebook story. My daughter went to study hall, and the teacher said, "Oh, can you go get the Chromebook?" And then the teacher marked her as absent. What? It's like, really? Oh, that's high school for you. That's setup. Yeah, that's setup, exactly. Wow. I'd like to see a judge do that in a courtroom. Send the plaintiff out for something. Right. Nope, not present. Guilty. Of course.
And then same thing over here. This I don't know here yet.
So what's the next piece of battle with the Chromebook?
Oh, that's exactly it. Great.
Yep, core boot working.
And it used to be like mobile phone,
Getting the mouse.
picture carrier, get a
Is the next
message,
battle?
and you get the message
Yep.
like halfway through the
Trackpad
meeting.
working?
Yeah.
Great,
I
thanks.
mean, the term is it
It's
synaptic?
an engineering school, huh? Great.
As far as I can
Right.
tell,
I mean, that's now, somebody recently not too recently,
did someone have like the synaptic
Yes.
PSM code?
yes, in head,
One has many
post 12,
already. The other doesn't.
they,
Doesn't.
maybe not post 12, maybe pre 12, forward 12. Synaptic settings became turned, I remember right, I can think about it. Trackpad support became turned on by default, or a specific mode of trackpad. They changed the mode of trackpad so that the newer trackpads work, but if you have an old trackpad, you're broken. Like all of my T400, X220, and before
Can you
are now
reference?
all broken.
Can you reference what setting was changed?
But everybody's new stuff works.
Because my stuff isn't particularly new, and it's
Yeah.
continued to work.
Okay.
Hey, how are you?
How about you?
Doing okay, thank you.
And my goal, was to make it more than oh yeah.
I'd have to go digging through mail archives to.
Of course, I've also got like 4 or 5 different like PSM
Yeah.
like
Maybe it does.
loader and systemtl settings.
Mm-hmm. Take fleet with
You need a clicker?
and you're probably already setting yours to values that force the old code to run.
Or I was already using the new code pad.
That could also be. I hate it when it's fleet defaults.
I got brighter.
Like I know some of the newer
Let's
ones.
put load group to 701. Come on. First off, it's just an asinine value. I mean, anybody that does that has not thought about what they're doing.
Well, you see, it makes sense on Linux.
You've seen that thread on there, haven't you? About the Chmod. Somebody put up a differential. They wanted Chmod, etsysyscuttle.com, and root's home directory / root.
Oh, wow.
701.
For fun that a
Well,
wire
first
be
off,
shown.
the sys controls are readable by everybody. Any process on the system can read all of the syscuttle. So changing syscuttle.com makes no sense at all.
Okay, that's
Getting
recording.
nothing from them.
Maybe if
Because
you
anytime
USB
it
power
sets can
recharge
be
the
read.
batteries, or you like pop it, I can show you.
What is this?
It's a Zoom. The Zooms are
And then
awesome.
why does it make sense on Linux?
That
I want to hear the rationale.
Wherever
Why-
that.
Because Richard Stallman is a crazy fucker.
Oh, well,
and
that's not a rationale.
Yeah.
and thinks that the wheel group is like authoritarian fascist. So Linux doesn't actually have a wheel group.
Notation things, whatever. Can't touch it.
It doesn't have a group with value 0?
That's a root group.
Okay.
That's just user roots, like
No.
default user group.
Okay. And what group do you need to be in to SU?
You don't need to be in a group to SU.
Yes, you do.
On Linux, no, you don't.
You're talking about sudo. That's different than SU.
No, I'm talking about SU.
You're kidding. You don't have to be in group 0 to SU. So they've removed that
Yeah,
protection mechanism?
that is exactly what I am saying.
Which are they?
Whoever.
Okay. That they.
Probably
Okay.
Stallman himself.
Not me.
Stallman
That
wanted no
they.
passwords on anything, right?
Huh?
Stallman didn't want any passwords on anything, right? And he'd like do some interesting.
Apparently he's mad about
Ed-
getting locked out of like one of the top 10 systems
Yes.
Hmm.
at MIT, and it's like, I wonder why they did that.
Hello.
Well, still working with
I am.
I remember somebody.
Till 7:30 this morning.
I mean, in the old day, we just used to write the passwords on the little pad next to the terminal. That was security.
There are people who still do that.
Yes, probably the people that want to promote a group to 7 hour. Or no, actually, those are the people that are driving the mentality that causes people to do things like write passwords down. Is if you make security painful, people will find a way to go around what you've done.
But yes, the new SU
Does not require
has no wheel concept.
Hello, everybody. I'm sure some folks will trickle in, but we're right at 7 o'clock. Welcome to Plug, Portland Linux Unix Group. And we've been at it for like 25 years. I've organized it for about 10 of those, and hopefully there will be 25 more years. Plug meets first Thursday. You found it. Congratulations. Third Sunday is the clinic at Free Geek. Has anyone not heard of Free Geek? Note the sticker on Russell's laptop. Free Geek's fantastic. It's a really old person. And occasionally there's Plug Advanced Topics. It's been back in force in the fall, and hopefully we'll be back in the spring. Some folks will head to the Lucky Lab Northwest, possibly before the meeting ends, sometimes after. And if you need a ride, hang out by a door. If you have a ride to offer, hang out by a door, and hopefully there'll be like perfect alignment of the two. Linux Fest Northwest is coming up. It is in Bellingham, Washington, end of April. It's quite cool and low stress. I like that. OzCon is coming up. It's huge. June this year? I forget. Check the site. It's up there, believe it or not.
in Portland, June?
Yeah. Well,
Have
Huh?
they sent out
I'm
like
going to be
email-
probably at Riot.
okay, well.
have
Well,
they-
then, of course, your event here, like anyone thinking of other events in town that have
their has OSCON like circulated their big got tables? Yes, we do.
That's
IETF,
Because it
Later
seems very different.
Yes, correct.
Most of the time, you
I-
don't hear about it until after.
IETF 107 coming up in March in Vancouver, BC.
True.
Yeah.
Can anyone here afford that? It's
Huh?
spendy. It's spendy, but it's cool.
Don't worry about paying registration fee in IETF.
Oh, okay, cool.
Go to the hackathon, it's free. 2
And
days of-
Teardown is coming up. June 19th to 21st. What is Teardown?
Yeah, you'll find out.
Very soon. Sweet!
I wore my tear down.
And then a Teardown shirt.
I
Oh
didn't
my
see
gosh.
That's because I have 8 of them though, so. Yeah.
Cool. Are there any first timers here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a record. Awesome. Welcome. How did you find out about it?
Whose class sent you here?
Caligator.
David Mandel.
David. Cool. He usually rolls in about 20 minutes late. Caligator, everyone? Great. Sweet. Friend, I like that. Great. Bring a friend. Plug is always looking for speakers with, 25 years ahead of empty slots. There's always an opportunity to share your amazing adventures with some interesting technology. I guarantee you each have a story to tell. I can see 3 or 4 speakers here with the music one. That was pretty damn cool. Russell, seasoned. So if you want any help preparing for that, I'm more than happy to give you ideas and coaching and slide help, whatever. And if you're nervous, don't worry about it. The audience will help you through it. They'll ask questions to get you through. They'll take over if really necessary. Yes?
Are you supposed to have slides?
You don't have to have slides. We've had great talks without slides. And Ted Middlestad goes full old school, like pen board and everything. Love it. Any questions? Any topics you want to provide? Ooh, you brought a copy.
So I
Yes.
just read this.
Let me show the camera.
So
Oh.
does anybody know how that's pronounced, the last name?
Kernahan.
Kernahan. You say Kernahan.
I say Kernahan.
I've heard almost 90% of the latent.
I'll do a reveal here.
Kernahan.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I've been
He's
hearing it pronounced for
he's
40
been-
years as
He's been
Kernahan.
introduced in his presence as Kernahan. But, maybe he's just gotten over it.
He just gave up.
Yeah.
Because everyone says Kernahan Ritchie.
Yeah.
It's one syllable.
It is.
It's like McDonald's. There's not-
So I just read that fascinating book, well written,
Didn't even know
about
it
the
was
history of Unix and his trajectory through life. He's still alive.
Yeah, that's a plus.
He
Isn't he a fellow at Google?
no, he's on the. There's several expel people at Google, including Rob Pike and
That's not.
Ken Thompson, who's kind of retired now, he says, but they were both on the Go team.
Right.
Kernahan or Kernigan is at Princeton, as I said. So the cool thing for me was I was leafing through the book, and on page 9 he mentions this guy, which I've mentioned this on the Plug Talk mailing list. There's this guy named Fernando Corbato or something like that, who was at MIT, who was the leader of Multics, which, like I said, amusingly, I thought in my email, is the drunk stepfather of Unix.
Oh, the loser.
Yeah.
Apparently Multics is getting some revival, huh?
I know the guy's, it turns out his nephew was here in town.
I hear a talk.
I don't know whether we can reel him in. I don't know.
Only ask. They can say
It's
no.
possible. It's
I
possible.
think that the Seattle Computer Museum may have a
I
multi
think
system.
they
Running.
do.
I know they have tops running, but I think they have a multi.
They have a front panel with lots of blinky lights. I
Oh,
don't
no,
know
they
what
got
speed.
they got real.
Well, no,
they got deck systems.
I'm talking about the Multics thing.
Oh,
that they have.
well, it's
Yeah.
On the list, I propose a show and tell of home labs. I have a few things to share. Would anyone else want to participate in what nifty stuff they've got in their
Do
home
we go
lab?
to your house?
No, we do it here. If
Does it have to
you're
be
really
in the
nice,
home
I could
still?
VPN you in, but we shall see.
I moved my
Office
home lab to a data center. So.
Okay. Any talk requests without naming a speaker, which sure makes it easier, but any topics that looking forward to this lovely new year here?
So not that,
Please.
I've been learning about Scapy. Does anybody know what Scapy is? It's a Python packet injection-y, packet decoding thingy. I got roped into PSAS and their ORSAT thing, and they're working on their little downlink. And we're going to use Scapy to do the packet injection.
Like satellite stuff?
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay.
LEO or
Yes.
LEO.
Basically the ISS work.
Okay, no
Anybody wants to
suggestions,
learn
not
vaguely
one, short of Russell having
about
something?
Scapy?
On.
I can talk.
Nothing? Anything? You're gonna get more ZFS talks.
No.
Russell's been vocal about that. And just today, there was a new release of ZFS for Windows. I've been working with Jorgen to do all kinds of problem discovery. And the latest release will go like hours on end instead of like 30 seconds. So I'm not polite to it, but someone has to. So check it out. It's a thing, and it's getting there. And only by pounding on it do we find what's wrong with it and get it out there. Because, you know, people need a good file system.
6 months out, I might have MPLS to do.
MPLS.
I don't know. There's probably no interest in this group. It's pretty
What? Say it again.
MPLS,
Oh, I'm
motor
good.
protocol level.
Yeah,
Rodney.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
Calligator solves that problem. People look and they self-regulate and show up, even on short notice. Welcome. Perfect timing for this talk has been, I don't know, 2 years in the making. Welcome, welcome. I've been begging, I've nearly broken your web form, like saying, hey, hi, it would be great to have a talk from your organization. So Josh will introduce us just about everything about Crowd Supply and their upcoming event that I'll have on my calendar, and take it away.
Great, thank you. How many people have heard of Crowd Supply before? Okay, good number. For those of you who haven't, or those of you who have forgotten, Crowd Supply is a open source hardware launch platform, basically. In very vague terms, how I tell my family about it, it's Kickstarter for open source hardware. Beyond that, it's very different, of course. So we'll talk about that. It is crowdfunding. So on the crowdfunding side of things, we do pretty well. Actually, last year, we launched 61 projects and 60 funded. So it's much higher than that 80% success rate. or funding success rate, I should say, which I'll get to in a second. People walk away with a pretty good chunk of change, but that's kind of to be expected because it's hardware, and hardware is expensive to build. And the thing that we've tried to do since day one and so far succeeded is that if you lay down money for something at crowd supply, then you get your thing or you get your money back. And usually you get your thing. And if you have questions, just interrupt me.
No statistic on that, on the number of monies given back?
It's very small. I mean, usually what happens is a project will fund and then it will make the thing and it won't make somebody's thing that was just one of, right? And so they'll get the money back or they'll upgrade them more likely to the next best thing. There have been, I think there's been one project where they actually just had to give all the money back. But that was a few $1,000. So we do that by, I mentioned we launched 61 projects. That's not a lot of projects, really, right? I mean, if you look at Indiegogo or Kickstarter, last year they probably launched thousands of projects. So we do that by really doing a kind of white glove treatment. We work really closely with each team. We look at all their bills of material and manufacturing plans. We suggest things, we introduce them to partners. Sometimes we supply the parts or help them source the parts. We handle a lot of the customer support, the media asset production, so videos, images, a lot of the text. We kind of guide them through all the stuff that a typical engineer is not good at, right? So they're really good at designing things and making a prototype and maybe even manufacturing that prototype, but beyond that, it's pretty rare that somebody else, that a single person can fill in, or even a whole team can fill in the entire idea to first batch delivered to customers. And there's a lot of gaps in there, right? We handle, on the flip side of the equation, and I'll show you, here's an example actually, that's probably better. This is Lime SDR, which I think is being used, the Lime SDR, Lime SDR regular one, not the mini, I think is being used in the ORSAT, which you mentioned with PSAS. It's the Portland State Aeronautics Society or Aerospace Society. So here's the crowd supply page for the Lime SDR in particular. Obviously, people like it for the money, right? They often come to us because of the money. That's not usually why they stay though. So we're good at selling things. We're really good at market validation. This is kind of the most important thing, right? As an engineer, you have an idea, it's all in your head, or maybe it's all on your desk in a prototype. You have no idea if the world really likes it. You think they might because, hey, you like it. But before you go and spend the next 6 months working on it and mortgage your house to get it built, you should find out if actually people want it. And so we indicate that in a few ways. Where obviously there's the number of people who've backed your project. There's media that we help generate and that you generate on your own. Did they like it? And of course, in this case, there was an official partnership between the Lime team and the European Space Agency. They officially backed it. They put in $100,000 and got a bunch of Lime SDR minis out of it. And they continue to actually purchase those. Speaking of which, probably the most important thing in a product is, can you sell it afterward? Because getting that first batch out is like getting your prototype done in the world of manufacturing, right? It's really just the prototype of manufacturing. Getting your second and third and 10th runs done those are equally hard steps as getting from prototype to your first batch. And we help you do that by continuing to purchase, distribute, and service this product for as long as it has legs, right? As long as people want it and you're willing to make it, then we will carry it. And even if you're not willing to make it, this is something we also fill in. If you're not willing to make it, but you set up the supply chain and it's running, you can just hand it over to us and we'll cut those checks and cut the purchase orders and they'll deliver it to us and we'll give you a royalty or license fee or whatever it is. And a bunch of our creators who are lone engineers who like the idea of ideation and prototyping but don't like the idea of running a distribution business, they love us for that. So that's basically it. I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about how we relate to open source and to Linux and to open silicon and things like that. That was the kind of the business side of things. On the values side, I'm going to switch out of this. you can kind of see, this is just a tour through our website. You can go, all this is online. There's kind of three things we're looking for. We're looking for something that's original, hasn't been done before, something that's useful. Novel does not mean useful. And it's something that is respectful. And respectful kind of encompasses the idea of open source. It encompasses the idea of kind of regenerative and not just throwaway. It encompasses the idea of respecting your users and their privacy and security, and don't be a company that sells them something that you get to brick remotely like 3 years later, right? And you can read in more detail about all of those things here. And I won't go over it in too much detail, but we have a proclamation of user rights that captures these 8 concepts: curiosity, independence, association, longevity, transfer, discourse, privacy, and security that all products we think should have. Now the reality is the world is complicated, and not every one of our products has all of abides by all of these things, or can even, right? So let's run through some examples to be concrete. One of our first high-profile projects was the Novena laptop by internet famous Bunny Huang, and Sean Zob's Cross. This was basically their ode to the Apple II in a way, right? They wanted to build a laptop for themselves that they knew about every single part, right? And they succeeded. It was a laptop. You see a lot of press. It opens in reverse like a sob. So there's the screen kind of opens toward you. It's spring loaded, which is kind of neat. And then it reveals the guts, right? And the guts include a bunch of replaceable parts, and a bunch of nice custom hardware. All the hardware you see here is custom, including the enclosure. There's a peak array underneath where you can attach your own extensions. Here's the board that they made that houses, I think it's an IMX 5 or 6 processor, I don't remember. But it's right next to a Spartan 6 FPGA, and this was 2014, so these were fairly high-end chips at the time, and they still carry some weight today. But this was one of the first pieces of hardware that had an ARM processor right next to a fairly high-powered FPGA, all of which was blobless, right? There are no firmware blobs on this board at all, and you can boot Linux, and it works. And I ran it as my laptop for a while, and it was great. And it allows you to explore, right? You can turn your laptop into an SDR using this setup with a Myriad RF extension.
What's an SDR?
Yes, good question. A software-defined radio. Which we can talk about in a second. We actually do a lot of software-defined radio stuff. So this was interesting, and yeah.
What's a blob? Is that what you said?
Yeah, blob. Yeah. So binary blob is my term, and not my term, but a term for firmware that has been compiled down to machine code, right? To a binary that you load onto maybe the CPU, but maybe like some peripheral, like a SPI controller or something, some controller on the board that isn't the CPU, and it's required for the thing to run. And typically, you don't have. I call it a blob because it's impenetrable. You can't see what's inside because you don't have the source code, and oftentimes that source code is not offered up, right? So an example of this is the Intel Management Engine, which we'll talk about a little bit. Right. Good to see.
Proud.
And it's really frustrating, right? Because if you want to find out how something works or improve something, and the only thing that's stopping you is a small, like 8 kilobyte binary blob.
That doesn't stop anybody.
Yeah, well, it stops some people. Yeah, you'd have to reverse engineer it, which could be illegal, right? Because of the DMCA, which we'll talk about in a second, also. But it's also just annoying, and it really is kind of disrespectful if you think about it. So this was an ideological project. They made it for themselves because they thought it was useful also, and they did in fact use this in a bunch of their business ventures. I think they made a gene sequencer with it. They made a few other kind of custom-built test and measurement pieces of equipment for their clients. But they also made it available, and you know, I think to their credit, they offered a full 5-year guaranteed lifespan, right? So they kept everything in stock through crowd supply for 5 full years. That just ended, I think, just a few months ago. And you could really rely on it. It had 2 Ethernet ports, which was also interesting. It was kind of their nod to, hey, you should use this to build a router that you could do cool stuff with, right? It had a bunch of like bells and whistles that I think most people just only scratch the surface of. But going back to the open source side of things, right? They want to build something that was as open source as possible with the resources they had, and this is what it ended up being, right? It ended up being a board. This board, the schematics and the layout were all released. All of the firmware that you load onto the board to make it work was released. You're not required, crucially, to sign any NDAs for any of this, right? And not only for this board, but with the chips on it, right? So you could literally just go out and shop in the chip supermarket and buy all the chips without signing any NDAs or without violating any laws, and build this board yourself. And that's actually a really hard thing to do for a laptop scale machine, right? Most chips that high-end chips that you buy today, some aspect of it is cordoned off, and you need to sign an NDA with the manufacturer to find out how it works. So if you wanted to, for example, enable super high-speed networking on an NXP chip, you can buy the chip, sure, but if you want to find out how that particular thing works, then you're signing an NDA, right? And they won't sign the NDA with you unless they have a good reason to. So just Joe Schmo off the street is not going to be finding out how that works. So this was really seminal in not only crowd supply's growth, but also in open source hardware in general. It kind of laid out a lot of the pitfalls there are, right? So you don't have to sign an NDA, but do you really know how this chip works? Is there logic in that chip, whatever chip I'm talking about on this board, that is obfuscated and is doing something you don't intend it to do? Which gets into the Intel management engine, right? This is an ARM chip, so it doesn't have that. Intel management engine was addressed. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's going to be a successor?
That's what everyone's asking. Yeah. I'm in touch with these guys pretty regularly. They don't have plans for that yet. They've done other projects with us, which I'll show you. But what this does is it plants a stake in this kind of multi-dimensional space of almost consumer grade or kind of prosumer devices, right? And laptops in particular. And I'll show you a few other laptops. So one of the next laptops that we did was the Librem 13 and 15 by Purism. And they're still going. They're a company that is still pumping out things. They did their first 2 laptops with us. This was, I think, the second one, actually. Let's see. The 15. Yeah, 15 was the first. And we don't carry them anymore, but you can still buy these on their site.
They do their phone on their own then?
They didn't do it through us, that's right. Yeah. I think they might have run that I'm not sure even if it was a campaign. I think it was. They kind of threw their own site. I think they did a tablet as well. So Todd Weaver is the founder of Purism, and their mission, in a nutshell, is to bring a fully usable GNU Linux FOSS experience to average people, right? So they have their own, they've customized all the layers that a typical user would see, so the desktop and some of the software and whatnot. In this case, they sourced the hardware, and the design of the main board was just a reference design with a few add-ons for hardware kill switches for the camera and microphone, and I think for something else I'm forgetting right now. What's that? Oh, yeah, wireless, thanks. And they just packaged it up through a contract manufacturer that was building these anyway, and they put their label on it, and they're selling it and supporting them. And their big claim to fame was that it was, you know, blobless, like I was saying before, all the way down to the bootloader. But it didn't address the key issue of the Intel management engine. So this is another example. Like, they needed the performance of Intel's i5 or whatever this, maybe it's i7, I forget. They needed that performance, and it was the only place to get it. And they didn't want to skimp on that, because that was like the key of their value proposition to users was it's a totally usable laptop. And yet they're still going forward with this idea of like free and open source, which is hard to balance those things, right? And to their credit, you know, they admitted, yeah, the Intel management engine is there. They did manage to find a way to kind of turn it off, essentially, right? Or at least they leveraged somebody finding that way. And I think they were encouraging of that effort. And you know, they laid out this kind of grand plan of, yeah, as soon as there's something that doesn't have this, we're going to use that.
Risk 5.
What's that?
Risk 5.
Risk 5, yes. Okay, so let's get into Risk 5. So Sci5 is a company that, let's look at this one. Sci5 is a company that was founded by a bunch of grad students out of UC Berkeley that had been working on the RISC-V specification, which is a instruction set architecture, ISA, which is an alternative to kind of x86 or, you know, Power 9 or whatever. Most of us are only familiar with x86, but, you know, there's ARM, there's MIPS, there's a bunch of other ones that are minor. RISC-V was an academic experiment that suddenly they decided, hey, this doesn't have to be academic, this could be a real thing. And so they started Sci5, which is a venture-backed company. We started working with them quite a while ago when they were like 20 or 30 or 50 people, and now they're like 400 or 500 people. We've launched all their dev boards so far. All but one, sorry. There was one educational one that they didn't do through us. This was the first one, the Hi5 one, and this was really just an Arduino, basically, like in some ways a crappy Arduino.
Didn't have a memory, if I remember right.
There's a bunch of things wrong with it. There's a bunch of really cool stuff about it, though. It's like 320 megahertz or something, which is pretty fast for an Arduino. It is RISC-V, so that's kind of the playground to get started. It's a 32-bit machine, and it was really to introduce people to RISC-V. It wasn't to actually use to build other things much. We sold a whole bunch of these. These numbers here, by the way, are only the ones that were sold during the campaign, and we've sold many more than that to after the campaign. We kept buying thousands and thousands of them and distributing them, and people really picked it up. They want to know about RISC-V. And their value proposition, Sci5's value proposition in particular, is we'll make RISC-V easy for you by, you tell us what you need, and we'll design an entire SoC around it, a system on chip. Yep.
Is yours 64-bit?
Get to that in a second. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Surprise later.
So
There's actually more 64.
this was launched through Crowd Supply as their first dev board. You couldn't really buy the chips through them, and that's not their business. Their business isn't selling chips like Intel sells chips. It's selling their design house, right? So you come to them, you work with them to develop your own chip, and then they fab that for you, and it's your IP, right? Like you're no longer buying, you no longer have the ARM tax, right? The ARM tax is basically, ARM is an IP company, they're not a chip company. They sell their IP to other companies and they make their chips. But as a result, your price goes up, right? So the 64-bit is this. This was the next thing they launched through us. This is the Hi5 Unleashed, which is the very first 64-bit Linux-capable board that you could buy. And you could, in fact, run Linux on this. You couldn't do anything else, though, because it doesn't have USB or PCIe or anything like that. So to accommodate that, they partnered with Microsemi, which is now part of Microchip technology, to make a fairly expensive board. This was, I think this was $2,000. Yeah, this is the expansion board for a $1,000 board, and together you had what amounted to a kind of crappy PC, right? But it was RISC-V, and it was kind of amazing, right? And for research, you couldn't have gotten it anywhere else. And we sold out of this and the Unleashed. They actually don't have any more chips, right? And it wasn't worth making more of that old chip when they're coming out with a new one. So this went to a lot of institutions, individuals, hobbyists, people just interested in this stuff, developers. And this is really paving the way for a world where you have a choice besides ARM and Intel, or just Intel right now and AMD, a world besides x86 for a high-end PC. Now, this gets into the silicon a little bit, right? Like, now you know what's happening in the chip because the IP is open, and you can even specify. You can say, I want this kind of bus and that kind of bus. Yeah.
Is Sci-Fi's IP open? Because the RISC-V spec is open. Does Sci-Fi ship their IP files?
They don't sell chips, right? So you contract with them to build your thing, and that thing is yours, right? And you can open those files if you wanted to.
But is the Verilog source code for that chip open? Can I get it?
No. And the reason why is the ISA is open source. So you can make the CPU core is open source, but that is not a computer. That's not a chip. You need peripherals. You need like memory management. You need I/O to the outside world, and all of that stuff is totally closed source, right? And you buy that IP. They're called IP blocks in this domain. You buy these IP blocks typically from the actual silicon foundry, right? The company that's going to manufacture your silicon, or there are these shops that will make them for you. But it's almost always closed source. There's very little that's actually open. There's a group called FOSSI, the Free and Open Source Silicon group, based out of the UK. At least one of the people there is from the UK, too, from the UK. They held the Latch Up event here. Did anybody go to that? No, it was great. It was the first time it was outside the EU, and it was in Portland last fall, I think. So anyway, they're working on kind of the entire breadth of open source, not just the core, but the IP and the peripherals and everything you need to make a full system. And that's going to be a very slow process, right? That's going to be something that takes a really long time because it's highly specialized. It's very, it's very expensive to test, and it takes a long time just to design. So that kind of gets into the idea of, well, okay, my RTL, my registered transfer language is kind of the base level code that you hand to a silicon foundry, and then they take that and build your thing. So your RTL might be open source, but that's still not as open source as you could be, right? Because what does the foundry do with that RTL to actually manufacture it? Could I take that same RTL to the same foundry and get the same thing? The answer is no, right? Not without all this, what I like to think of, and this is kind of getting out of my league a little bit in terms of actual experience, but what I like to think of as compiler declarations, right? If you have some C code and you decorate it a lot with compiler declarations that are specific to your compiler, then you'll get a different answer than if somebody else compiles it, right? So the same thing happens with RTL. It gets decorated, essentially, and then it's manufactured, and the output is there. And those decorators and what you get out, most of that's just foundry specific. So there's not really a standard that I know of. There might be, but I'm not aware of it. So that's even another level that is kind of opaque to everyone right now. And going back to your question about are Bunny and Zobs doing something in next version, the next thing they're working on, and I don't know if this is going to be on Crowd Supply or not, but Trusted is their next attempt at kind of truly secure, open, verifiable hardware. And it's kind of funny because it's basically a Palm Pilot, right? If anybody remembers what a Palm Pilot is. Palm Pilots, circa 1992 or whatever, were kind of the smartphones of the day, except there was no phone aspect to it, right? It wasn't connected to anything. It was just a personal digital assistant, as they called them.
There was a jacket that fit on there eventually.
Right. But it couldn't talk to anything, and it just had your data in it, and you kind of consulted with it, and that was it. They're essentially rebuilding that so that it does not connect to anything except through an SDIO port, right, which is typically used for like a micro SD card. But you can also put in a Wi-Fi adapter or other things in that. And it's to not only hold your secrets, but to view them and manipulate them. So you can trust the keyboard, you can trust the screen, you can trust the entire device to not leak your data, or at least to a very high degree trust the device. And then you can kind of have a very thin I/O between it and the outside world. That could be a micro SD card, it could be a Wi-Fi connection, it could be a connection to your Android or Apple phone that does the communication. But by the time it gets to that, it's a secured, encrypted line, right? So I'd say it's half thought experiment and half like we actually want this thing for our friends and us.
Right? They're kind of doing that because back in the day, Bunny discovered that they had all these hardware loopholes built into the modern laptops and things like that.
Yeah, so there's interdiction is a thing. When people snatch your laptop from being shipped to you and they put stuff in it, at security checkpoints, you have to give your laptop away for a few minutes. Who knows what's happening to it? There's all sorts of stuff, and not only that, but just backdoors, right? I mean, Intel Management Engine is basically an entire operating system that has whatever, who knows what's in there, right? And you can remotely control that. That's supposed to be a feature, and it is for a lot of people. But it's also
that's the reason they don't use Lenovo laptops. They stopped using Lenovo laptops because they discovered that there was the Chinese manufacturers.
Yeah, and the crazy thing there was the Lenovo Taiwanese had, I guess they cut a deal with some advertiser of all things, right? Like, why is it really worth losing all of your users' faith for some ad money? But that's what they did, and it just shows that if you leave it to a company, then that's what happens. And so part of Crowd Supply's mission is to narrow that gap between user and designer so that it's more of a direct-to-market approach. Of course, huge supply chains require huge infrastructure and companies and things like that, but there are ways to do that better respect users' rights. So that's the next thing that they're working on. So not everything on Crowd Supply succeeds, but we're still happy that it happens. The Talos workstation first started on Crowd Supply. It actually raised a good amount of money, just not the almost $4 million that they needed, right? And this is a small consulting company, manufacturing company in the US that wanted to make a very secure, very high-end workstation. This is kind of at the level that you could find in three-letter agencies, right? That they would trust it. And you could do really high-end work on it. And so they built this thing using the IBM's Power 8 processor, I think at the time, Power 8, because it didn't require any binary blobs, and they had this pretty clever way of kind of hardening their board at the hardware level against attacks. But if you're talking about buying a workstation and all in to get something running, it's $18,000. It's kind of a hard sell for most people, right? But it was actually a great deal for what it was.
So did all the backers pay that? And then they just got their money back?
So all the backers give us their credit cards.
And credit cards?
Yep.
Unlimited.
Yeah.
You can take them
And we just, I've been on vacation for the last 4 years.
Credit cards.
Yeah. So they give us their credit cards. We don't charge them until it's funded, until they hit the $3.7 million, which they didn't, so we didn't charge them.
And so each of them would have been due $17,000.
Well, it depends on what they got, right? So
Oh, okay.
that's one of the levels. The lowest level was
Oh,
3700.
T-shirt.
Oh, that's
Yeah, right. It's a very expensive T-shirt. No, this is just the and there's different levels of chip that you can get. I mean, the chip itself at the time was a few $1,000, I think.
What's this thing?
So this was like they wanted a very high-end thing that was totally blob-free, and this was kind of the option that they settled on. So like each of these things kind of hit a different point in this space. Like I was saying,
I have a request. Do you have a hardware random number generator?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, you do?
Oh.
DRNG, yeah,
See?
totally. Let's look that up
I
right
bought
now.
one of those. Oh, nice.
So,
Yeah.
this is probably the most hardware and random.
So random.
Yeah, I think I don't remember.
The price was random.
Yeah.
Refresh it.
Yeah. There's a few things that do that. I think this is probably the closest thing to what you're looking
I
for.
bought one of those before. They're
Yeah.
kind of neat. I guess.
Yeah. And this isn't a particularly high bit rate, I think, but it's interesting. Yeah. It's cheap.
For CD. It's,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
other times you need just a ton of bits.
Right. What's that?
What is that?
Oh yeah. So true random number generator.
Oh, okay.
TRNG is what stands for. What that stands for. It's basically a piece of hardware. You stick it into your laptop, and it. In this case, I think it's dev random. Let's see here. Yeah, dev random. You have a certain amount of entropy in dev random. This augments that. So the idea of is that it actually?
Yeah, it's one right here.
Oh yeah, right on. You just plug it in, and it should.
$35?
I think there was some software thing you had to install.
30.
Is there?
I think so.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a way to get entropy, right? And entropy is really important for basically all cryptographic operations, right? If you need to generate random keys, a computer without actual randomness, it's not random, right? You have a seed, but the same seed will produce the same results all the time. There's actually no algorithmic way to know unless you have powers I don't know about. What's going to come out?
Microwaves.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are ways of kind of.
If you manipulate the physical phenomenon that
Yeah.
is deriving
Right.
its source of randomness from, you
Right.
can
You can
perturb.
edge it more
you
toward
can
one.
perturb them,
Yeah.
but you can't really control it.
What is that physical phenomenon?
Well, this one I think is just a noisy diode.
Yeah.
Let me see.
1/f silicon junction noise.
Let's see here. Here is why it's how it works. Thermal noise. So yeah, it amplifies thermal noise. It's this cool modular entropy
Oh, it's
multiplication.
a resistor?
I think so. Yeah.
It says there, thermal noise of resistors is being amplified.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you can actually look at the pretty simple circuit. Here's some data on how random it actually is, how you clean it up to whiten it. So I think the software that you're installing is whitening this screen. That's right. There are many ways of getting noise. Some of them are very expensive. Some of them are easy. Some of them, they all have different problems. But it's kind of cool that somebody just open sourced it and said, "Here, have some random bits." A more extreme version of all of that was called Orwell, which is a really fun project. I'm just going to play the video here.
Physical security is everywhere.
Oh, that's me.
Except where we need it.
That's me too.
On the outside, Volvo has two USB Type-C ports, a micro HDMI port, a power button, and a no-touch screen for displaying its security status. On the inside, Volvo is equipped with a modern CPU, plenty of RAM, and 480 gigs of automatically encrypted storage. The secure microcontroller holds the key to the encrypted drive, which controls the electrical power to the rest of the
don't know if you could hear that, but
It's an external hard drive?
no. So it's basically the team that made this was a product design team that specialized in point of sale systems, right? So they actually designed the Clover swipe system that you see pretty often. And when you're dealing with point of sale systems, POSs, you have to be what's called PCI compliant, and PCI is payment card industry. Yeah. And that could mean a whole lot of things, right? It could just mean like you have to have protocols in place when this happens, or it could mean you have to conform to these very technical specifications. And that's kind of more what this is. This is a, what do they call it, FIPS
104.
1.4, yeah. Which is a government standard for security that if you're going to use hardware in certain situations, either with certain agencies or with certain types of data, then you have to be compliant. And so this is compliant with those things, where they were trying to get compliance at the time. The puck is the computer. It's completely sealed and encased in this mesh that's actively pulsed by a secure microcontroller, which I'll talk about in a second. And if there's any break in that mesh at all, it shuts down and erases the keys. You get, like, the magic smoke is gone. The secure microcontroller is a small device. Again, it's inside this mesh, so you can't even get to it. But if you did get to it, and you tampered with it physically, it would also shut down and die because it has its own mesh inside. And this is a thing that you have to sign an NDA for to even know how it works. And you're usually making like kind of bank level hardware, right? Either fobs or other devices. And the interesting thing about this one is, they wanted something that was fairly high end. They used an Intel processor, but their approach was to kind of just trust what people were telling them, right? They're trusting the processor, they're trusting the microcontroller, even though they don't know how it works. They're trusting all these different pieces at face value, but they're trusting a lot of them and kind of lining them up against each other, right? And so you don't really have to trust the management engine to trust the microcontroller and vice versa, and the microcontroller can shut down the entire processor that the management engine is running on. So even if you don't trust the management engine, you can still kind of contain it in a way. This did fairly well. It wasn't like a runaway success. It cost a lot to make, obviously. It's very polished and whatnot. They were really trying to get it into the hands of people who have a large incentive to care about security and information security. I'm not sure if they're still manufacturing or not. This is a few years ago. But it's another, it's another interesting idea or data point in this multi-dimensional space of what it means to be secure and private and open source in personal computing. And of course, we do a lot of stuff that's not really considered personal computing and is more just hardware, right? So we did a t-shirt. Yep, this is the MOSFET Girl t-shirt, which is a play on the Transistor Man t-shirt that was made based on the Art of Electronics diagram explaining transistors in Horowitz and Hill. Here is a Lego motor. Actually, this guy's local.
Yeah, you.
Yeah, it's Keith.
Keith.
Yeah, Keith Packard likes Legos apparently, and
Who doesn't like Legos?
Oh, right, that's true.
I hate them when I step on them.
That's true. Yeah.
Who doesn't?
But you only step on them because you like them. They wouldn't be there. So this is he made his own language, Snek, which is kind of a mini Python, and it's got introduction to Circuit Python kind of. We have this. Somebody just launched a basically play this real quick.
Did you redo the electronics?
They basically replaced the motor controller.
Cool.
So they took the Sur-Ron, which is kind of the latest in the electric motorcycle world, right? It's Segway's partnering with them, and I think owns a majority share now. But they took that and they souped it up even more. So this is a racing bike and they made it even racier with a better motor controller, with a better battery controller. So you can go much faster, higher torque, longer distances, etc. And the cool thing that they did here was they also made a version using the same controller that is an upgrade kit to the Honda Cub, which is the most manufactured vehicle in the entire world. This is a 4-stroke motorcycle, and there's many different versions over many decades in many countries, but I think all of them are compatible with this. You just kind of rip out the internal combustion engine and put in some batteries and this controller, and you're off to the races. That kind of shows you a bit of the breadth. This is basically a pick-and-place machine that's totally open source. Pick-and-place is a machine that you can program to automatically pick up small components and place them on anything really, but typically a printed circuit board with solder paste on it. Then you reflow them. Yeah.
Is there a lawn tractor version of that electric
Not yet. Yeah. But there's an open source project. I forget what it's called. It's called Open something. That is, their mission is to build the 50 most useful
the tractors,
bulldozers, pile drivers, things like that.
Open source ecology or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't really interacted with them much. I've I think communicated with them over email.
Cool.
So there's all sorts of stuff. My own pet project, which I have yet to actually launch, is this guy. So this is a steno-type machine, and I won't get into the whole story, but basically I got roped into writing some open source steno-type software, which was tons of fun. But by the time I understood stenography, I was like, this shouldn't be software, this should be hardware. And so I started on this, and this is a side burner project for me. But the idea is that it does all of the translation and interpretation and control inside of it, and it just hooks up as a HID keyboard, right? And so your computer doesn't really know what it is, and it just looks like you're typing super fast. So yeah, you can get a certified stenographer, I think, gets 225 words a minute at bare minimum, consistently.
Have you ever run into systems that can't process input data that fast?
Well, I haven't made this yet, so.
But you might.
Because I could see you uncovering some bugs.
Yeah.
Somebody recently with a HID device that they were trying to get working with uncovered some USB stack issues, and that certain USB stacks cannot process HID input at high rates.
Yeah.
No surprise.
That's not surprising, yeah. So the software version of this that I wrote a long time ago, and which has since been maintained by a bunch of other dedicated and talented people, was basically just sending the keystrokes to the machine, and then the machine would do the processing and then internally spit out the lots of keystrokes or lots of letters. So yeah, I don't know yet. That would be a blocker for me.
I have a big old potentiometer for speed of dumping it out.
Right.
Crank it, foot pedal, whatever.
So and to do that project, I first needed to actually make the keys that I wanted, and so I contracted a manufacturer of keyboards to make basically their standard key switch, but to my specifications on how much force there should be and whether it's tactile or not, and things like that. So now there's the quiet, linear red Matthias, which didn't exist before.
So you're attempting to match the physical stenographer machines that people are trained on, or in the tactile feedback?
I'm trying to make it similar, but to match it, you would definitely notice that it's not the same because it's a totally different physical mechanism on most. Like this traditional steno machine is levers, kind of like an old typewriter. Super fascinating. I should give another talk just on this once I have it. It's really fun, but I don't want to talk about it until it's done because, yeah. Okay, so I'll end there just with the formal presentation, but I think the main takeaways are that Crowd Supply is really interested in not only open source software and how that boils down into hardware and what levels of hardware you have. Actually, I'm not going to end it yet. I have a few more things to say. There's all these levels, and I've kind of been talking about them, right? There's the NDA level kind of documentation, there's schematics, there's layout, which is like the schematic is the diagram, the flow chart. The layout is what actual copper layers look like, right? Which is tricky if you're dealing with high-speed lines. That takes a lot of skill to make the right traces, the right length, and the right width, and the right turning radius, and all that. There's silicon, what's happening in the chip itself. There's different layers of that even, what's happening in silicon. How you get these things manufactured. And then there's also just the supply chain side of things. So Raspberry Pi is a good example, right? What generally is considered to be an open source single board computer. The problem is you can't buy that chip. So if you wanted to make another single board computer based on that chip, you're out of luck. Because the whole point of that chip or the whole point of Raspberry Pi is to promote Broadcom, right? Or, I'm not sure who they are now, but I think at the time it was Broadcom. And they make that chip only for the Raspberry Pi, and that's a locked down supply chain, right? You can't get that anywhere else, which kind of defeats the purpose of making it open source, in my opinion. One of the projects we recently had was called Giant Board, wanted to solve that problem. And there's a few others like that, right? Like you can get the Pocket Beagle, or the Beagle board, which is more open source in the sense you can buy the chip, the Octavio chip. The problem with that is the Octavio chip costs more than the full Pocket Beagle, right? The Pocket Beagle you can get for $25. The Octavio chip is $40.
How does that work?
It's all marketing.
You can buy a Pocket Beagle in the vending machine.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah. And Pocket Beagles are great, actually. I use them myself.
Are the rock chips locked down?
The what?
Rock, 3388, 30.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. This is, I think, the first example I know of a single board computer. So you can boot Linux off of this chip. Is the SAMD51, maybe? Some 50. SAMD-A5. Yeah, SAM-A50. I don't know. But this guy, Chris, out of Colorado, maybe? Let's see. He's from Arizona, sorry. He designed this Featherwing compatible, which is a form factor board that boots Linux using a chip that is readily available and costs less than the board, right? So you could actually use this to prototype some stuff and then go out and design and make your own board and have it be feasible, like economically, and from a supply chain perspective. So supply chain is another aspect and facet to this whole problem. And ultimately, lessons that we've learned from open source software and kind of what worked and what didn't will apply in different ways to open source hardware, but at a lot of different levels, right? There's a lot of complexity, even just in the software that runs hardware, right? The firmware, how you manufacture everything requires software. It's also the testing, all of that. So it's a much slower process. It's a much more expensive process. That's why CrowdSupply exists, to help people kind of get the funding and validation they need to bring different versions of what they consider open hardware to life. So I'll end there. Any questions? Happy to talk about any of these projects or projects that you know about that I haven't talked about. If you have an idea for a project, happy to talk about that too. We can talk about our process of selecting projects and whatnot. Oh yeah, I forgot. Teardown is here in Portland.
Oh, yes.
It is June 19th through 21st. This is our third one. Tickets just went on sale this week, actually, so super early bird price. Price will double by the time Teardown comes around. But it's basically a 3-day party for hardware. It's going to be held this year at PCC Cascade, which is in North Portland, right off of Killingsworth and Albina. And it's talks, it's workshops, it's demos, it's installations, all about hardware. Pretty much runs the gamut from kind of security and what are we doing in open silicon to, hey, glowing LEDs and look at what I can 3D print. We had a workshop for people who had never soldered before, which was really popular last year, all the way up to workshops on how to design your own antennas for your own software-defined radios. So it really is, if you're interested in hardware, it's for you. I think last year we had 266 people. It was, like I said, 3 almost full days from morning, 9 in the morning to 6 p.m. was the official programming, but then we had after programming all the way through midnight, I think, most days. It was tons of fun. Russell was there. Yeah. Were you there? Okay. Yeah. It was tons of fun, and it's here, and people come from all over the world to see it. We have we've already sold a bunch of tickets, and a lot of the faces will be familiar. So I encourage you to come. And of course, right the weekend after this, there's tour camp. I don't know if you can buy tickets for that anymore, but and I'm not involved in that, but that's also a neat hardware thing.
Maybe I can make it.
Yeah. Yes.
Are there any projects you're most proud of and perhaps least proud of?
Well, yeah, I
lessons learned.
Well, there's lots of lessons learned. Yes. We used to do projects that weren't engineering focused. We used to do hot sauce and books and bras and apparel and like you name it, we did. What's that? The shirt? Well, the shirt is kind of hardware focused. But we did, yeah, let me show you a few that...
It does have a transistor on it.
Let me show you a few that you wouldn't think of as today being crowd supply projects, right? Here is... Handful is a very cool company that's actually based here in Portland. They raised a bunch of money to finance the onshoring of their bra manufacturing. And it was specifically for cancer survivors, breast cancer survivors. We handled the fulfillment, and we handled most fulfillment for most of our creators. We kind of, and this was in 2013, so it was a long time ago. That was the year we were founded, or the year we opened, I should say. That's an example of something that you wouldn't see today. There's Wild Outdoor Apparel, making Sky launched 5 sets of jackets with us, apparently. This is Dan Teague's. This was one of the first projects we launched, actually, I think on the launch day, maybe. So these were jackets he designed. He was a designer at Columbia Sportswear, among other places, and he decided he had some ideas that he wanted to try himself, so he came to us for help. There was, this is, forgetting the name. Here we go. The Floating Ballet, which was a kit to play beer pong in the pool, right, basically. And I think he got like a couple of his friends to buy one, and yeah, hey, why not?
Anybody drown?
What's that?
Nobody drowned.
No, not that I know of, yeah. There was...
I mean, you can play beer pong when you're sober.
Doggy bath shield, which did not fund, but we're giving your dog a bath. So this is all stuff that, like, very early on, we were just interested in manufacturing, right?
Sweet.
And of course, in our heart of hearts, like, our backgrounds were electrical engineering. All the projects that did well were around that, and so it didn't take long for us to be like, okay, we can't do these other projects. We have to focus on what is canonically considered hardware, and not just any manufactured good.
How does crowd supply get its revenue out of this?
Yes. So we take a cut of sales for the crowdfunding, and it's higher than other places because we do a whole lot more. But most of the money we make is from sales afterward, and so we are highly incentivized to make sure that this is a long-term thing and not just a kind of burst of activity and then dies, right?
You ride the scale of economics.
Yeah.
Once it goes beyond the initial funding, that cost to produce goes way down.
Well, there's that, and also we have great SEO because it launched on Crowd Supply, and it's probably only available there for at least a short amount of time until they get other distributors. And we actually help people distribute, right? I should say that. here's our current list of distributors. Obviously, not all of
Mauser.
Yeah, not all of
Not
the.
DigiKey.
So we used to distribute through DigiKey. They don't carry it anymore. We're actually owned by Mauser now. They bought us 2 years ago.
That's why you're no longer at DigiKey.
But you know, not all of our products are through all of these companies, but you know, they pick and choose just like any reseller would. And we're constantly growing this list. We work pretty closely with a lot of these. So you know, some of these folks you'll see at Teardown as sponsors or just as attendees.
What are Sports Internet Solutions?
That, I don't know why it's named that,
Okay.
because they sell electronics, but it's basically, it's this two-person team that sells through Amazon. So they have an Amazon shop, and I don't, like I said, I don't, maybe that's what they used to sell sports gear. I don't know. But we could, yeah, find out. So yeah, here's some stuff that they sell. And it's not sports gear, I don't think.
Well,
Yeah, so
you might
they
apply
play the
some of
Amazon
that to wearable.
What's that?
You might apply some of that to wearables for sports.
Yeah,
The teams
that's
that
true.
used to use it in wearable.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Huh?
Oh, pretty cool. Yeah, right. Yeah.
There are a lot of outfits that do roughly this kind of thing, but my experience is they're not very good at it,
Mhm.
or the results are bad.
Mhm.
Why have you been successful, and why aren't those guys following you?
Right. Well, by this kind of thing, you mean helping people bring their products to market? Yeah. Well, that's a complicated and simultaneously complicated and simple question. But I think it's because we are ourselves engineers, and so we understand the steps to manufacture something. We're super focused on just this one domain, so we don't, like I said, don't deal with hot sauces anymore, even though we love hot sauce. And we really kind of, we actually reject about 90-something% of the projects that come to us, right? And some of them are they wouldn't be a good fit anyway. It's not even appropriate, you know.
Or hot sauce.
Well, or like pickle factories, or like, you know, we had one recently that was a snail farm, which, don't get me wrong, is a great business idea. And had I deep pockets, I would totally invest, right? But, and so we reject a lot of the projects that come to us. Those that we don't reject, we typically change in some way. Right? We ask them to change something about their pricing or their manufacturing or their openness or whatever before we work with them. And once we're working with them, we do a lot of the work that most people fall over for, right? So, you know, there are a lot of prominent, like high-profile campaigns that raised millions of dollars and then totally failed to deliver, right? The coolest cooler here in Portland was one example. You know, there's the Zeno drone example, and these aren't malicious people, right? They're well-intentioned. They have a good idea. They just didn't know how to price it, or they were overpromised, and they were just inexperienced. And so we vet for that, and then we try to, where we can, fill in the gaps, right? So that's how we're successful, and that's why we only launch, you know, 100-ish campaigns a year, and other places are launching thousands. You know, you can launch a campaign on other platforms without ever talking to anyone, and you know, you're just kind of hoping for the best. Now, the question I get asked fairly regularly is, well, you're so small, how do you get traffic? Yeah, we have an audience, we have traffic and all that, but really, on any platform, it's not how much traffic the platform gets, it's how much goes to your page. And so that we're very good at. Yeah. Yeah.
So on the technical side, what is the typical review process for a new project?
Yeah. You fill out a form, a project submission form. It asks you a bunch of questions like how open is it, what kind of prototype do you have, what do you consider success, you know, what kind of community have you built up, things like that. We then look at that, and there's a section for your team, right? And we look at the whole picture, right? We probably do more vetting and due diligence than most angel investors, right? And angel investors are supposed to be like, I'm gonna give you $100,000, you know, let's have lunch, and you know, that might be it. What's that?
Usually takes more than a lunch.
Well, sometimes. I mean, I've seen investments more than that over a Skype call, right? But you know, we're going to look at your team, your experience. Have you done this before? What's the state of your prototype? Do you have a prototype? How many revisions have you done? Are you looking? What's your funding goal? Is it reasonable, or is it just like kind of a ambitious, aspirational goal? Do you have any idea of what pricing should be like? Are you building in margin for resellers? Are you building in margin for fulfillment and shipping and returns and, you know, attrition and all that? Do you have a manufacturer picked out, or did you just hand build it yourself? And so all of these questions and many more kind of give us a full picture of how successful this can be. And then it also depends on how well aligned with our values it is. There are plenty of good products that we've rejected simply because they didn't want to budge on the openness part, right? And we're not really interested in helping yet another closed source project, because there are plenty of places to do that, right?
Yep.
You know, how worried somebody is about their IP is, in some ways, it's a sign of something. For me, it's a red flag, right? For a venture capitalist, it might be a green light, right? But in most cases, if you're overly concerned about IP, then I think you have the wrong mindset for crowd supply anyway. And in fact, you know, I regularly make the argument that open source will actually make you more money, and here's why. Because, you know, if it's really an interesting product, then you want to be first to market and build the community faster, and that's a good way to do it. So, and a lot of our products are fairly niche, right? They're test and measurement equipment, or they're not something you'd find in Target. And so, as such, it's a kind of a small market, which means, but a niche market, which means that you tell one person about it, and suddenly they all know about it. You don't have to do broadcast medium, really, like TV ads or anything like that to be successful. And once you have that market, it's hard for somebody else to come in and even just copy you directly and take it away from you, right? Because your name is there and you have the customers. So that's the main argument. Yeah.
Are you hiring here in Portland?
Are we hiring?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, our
For what?
we have a
These are just job fairs.
yeah, we have a job section.
I already checked Mauser.
Yeah. So Mauser
They
does
had
our-
Portland, Oregon. They said none.
Yeah. Well, so
Yeah, but Mauser's
I mean, it's not a secret that we're owned by Mauser, but you wouldn't know it. Like, there's a blog post on the site, and like we ship stuff through Mauser, but we're totally separate. You know, I'm a co-founder of Crowd Supply. I still run it. I'm actually going to Texas.
You're hiring for all those?
What's that?
You're hiring for all those?
Yep, and I think one more that's not even there, like a manufacturing coordinator is something we've been thinking about. We just hired somebody last month. Right now we're working with some contractors for software development and whatnot. But yeah, we're a small team. We're 9 people right now. I think soon to be 10.
Jobs at crowdsupply.com.
Yep. So yeah, if you are interested or know somebody, please send something.
I know me.
What's that? Yeah, that's good. That's a good start.
You don't, in your supply chain side, do you have any relationships with any of the foundries? What's the supply chain side relationships?
So,
Like, look,
You're more about when you have cash and a design, are you going through the whole process and countries?
So we typically don't have the bandwidth to actually do the engineering or even the setup. Let's say you have the design. It's still up to you to figure out that next leap, right, into the first batch. Now, once you have that, we can kind of take over and keep paying the person who you paid to make it. But here's a list of what we call the provider directory. And it's kind of hard to read probably, but there's a bunch of different things here. Some recently added things. You know, we worked with this T-shirt printer, right? It's this silk screener. Here's a plastics manufacturer. But let me find
electronics fabrication.
Here's a bunch of assembly houses, fabricators. You know, there's Oshpark is probably on this list. We're good friends with a lot of these folks, especially here locally. Here's Oshpark, Macrofab. We've worked with them before. PCBWay, Advanced Assembly. There's a bunch, and the only way to get on this list is if you have worked, if they have worked with a product from Crowd Supply. So if a real creator used them to manufacture, or some aspects of the manufacturing process. So you can see Oshpark has been used quite a bit, and you can see what they've done. This was the prototype PCB manufacturer. So they didn't actually do the final PCB, but the prototypes were done here, and that's still worth knowing. So certainly you can just browse this as a public site, but also when we see the plan, and if we think that this is a good plan, but I think you just put it together because it was the easiest thing to do, then we might suggest other options. On the other hand, if you really thought about it and you're like, this is the plan and I love it, we don't want to interfere, and you can by all means go through that. Yeah, we've had some partnerships with a few manufacturers that we kind of funnel projects their way.
How do you feel about Kickstarter?
I love Kickstarter.
You like it?
Yeah, and I like a lot of it. I think what's happened recently has been really unfortunate. But I don't really consider them to be a competitor. I don't think they consider us to be a competitor. Actually, I'm pretty sure Kickstarter folks are coming to Teardown, which is great.
Let's go down the competition.
I hope so. Yeah, right. You know, Kickstarter is a great place for arts patronage, is how I put it, and we're a great place for launching products. Of course, they launch some products, and we do some art, and that's fine. So yeah, I used to know a bunch of people at Kickstarter. I think a lot of them have left since then, but I respect their work. Yeah.
Could you touch on some of your SDR campaigns?
Yeah. So SDR, software defined radio. We have a radio,
super duper radio
and wireless section. So software-defined radio is kind of what it sounds like. It's a device that you can, in software, change typically the frequency and modulation scheme of actual radio waves, right? Both the receiving and sometimes the transmission, depending on the piece of hardware. And you can do that within pretty wide ranges. You know, the more expensive it is, the wider the range, or the higher the bandwidth, or whatever.
Does the FCC come down on you on those?
It depends what you do with it. Yeah. So if you break the law, then yes.
But then you can sue too.
Maybe. I mean, you can sue anyone for anything. Yeah, it's true. But that's like, you know, if I run over somebody in a car and I did it intentionally, typically the car manufacturer is not going to be sued for it. If the car runs out of control and it's not the driver's fault, then then it might be the manufacturer. So we worked with a bunch of different companies and individuals on a bunch of different software-defined radios. One of them, actually a bunch of them, are by a single company called Lime. And here's the 6 projects they've launched 5 of these. Yeah.
Does the Mini completely replace the original Lime now?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's missing some functionality.
So there's only 2 channels on the Mini, and there's 4 on the original. That's the main difference. That same chip, the LS7002, that Lime itself manufactures. So they basically went through us to launch their dev boards, right? They're selling the chip. They're using it on their dev boards. They made the Lime SDR originally, then the Lime SDR Mini, and then they came out with the LimeNet, which is kind of packaging that in a PC with some peripherals around it, so you could actually have a base station, kind of. And then came the LimeNet Micro, is that right? Yes, which I think they combined that with a Raspberry Pi compute module. So in a very small form factor, you have potentially a full base station that can do LTE telephony. And then they launched the Lime RFE, which RFE stands for Radio Front End, which is compatible with the Lime SDR and I think Mini. And so that's what does the amplification and filtering to actually broadcast more than just be on your desk. And then the crowd cell is the combination of all those things, which hasn't launched yet, into a single box that you have your own cell station or whatever else you want. They're kind of in the cellular space, but you could also use these for a lot of other things like what Russell and PSATs are doing. Speaking of which, I should probably... ORSAT is also going to launch through us, not literally. They have a literal launch window in this fall, isn't it?
Yeah, I have the impression that that's not nailed down completely.
I don't know. I don't think there's a date yet, but I do think that it's somewhere in time in the fall.
They've got a countdown timer.
Oh, really?
I'm told that it doesn't actually.
Okay. Anyway, this is a really cool project done in this building. Right there, what they're doing is they got a spot on the ISS for a 2U CubeSat. So a 1U CubeSat is a 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter cube that gets literally thrown out of the ISS and spins around a bunch and then burns up. They have a 2U CubeSat, so it's two of those kind of stuck together. Let's see if there's a picture of them. Yeah, so this is what it'll eventually look like. And you'll see it has like stuff springing out of it. All that stuff will be compacted into it. It goes into like a very standardized tray mechanism and is launched in a very standard way. But then when it's out in space, all these things kind of spring up. This is pretty cool. It's a helical antenna that's literally beaming Wi-Fi from space down to Earth. And so they cleverly call it the world's longest selfie stick, right? So they're going to beam video and images of you down to you. And what you're going to receive that with, so there's only one of those satellites, but there will be hopefully many of these handheld receivers. And you can see that it's also a helical antenna. It's holding a smartphone, right? So you just put your smartphone in it, you load up an app which tells you where the thing is, and you point it up there, and then the receiver, the antenna, receives the Wi-Fi and shows you a picture of yourself. And it will fly over Oregon and a bunch of other places many times. So it's part outreach program. There's actually science going on as well. And I think they're studying the reflectivity of certain types of clouds, like cirrus clouds. So there's kind of a two-pronged mission, but we're focusing on the outreach side. So we want to get this. I think the target is $50 for this thing, out to as many people as we can, but especially high school students. So you get them excited about space and science.
Orbital GoPro.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, you can see it says part of the Corvo RF Accelerator. Corvo is a huge company, but they have a base here in Hillsboro, and they do some manufacturing in Hillsboro for a bunch of RF stuff. And so we work with big component manufacturers to get projects that use those components more press and more resources. So keep an eye on that. Hopefully that's launching in the very near future. We want to get it out to people before the satellite actually launches.
Any TSMC?
TSMC. What about TSMC?
Do you have any relationship with TSMC?
I don't personally. So Crowd Supply doesn't.
Crowd Supply had any?
So Crowd Supply is one node away from all the foundries themselves, right? Our creators have worked directly with TSMC or Global Foundries or other places like that. TSMC is Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturer.
Global Foundries and other.
Yeah, so I think there's only like less than 2 handfuls of foundries in the world, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. I think there's only, I'm not sure how many are in the United States left, maybe just
Intel.
Is it IBM?
IBM
might have one still.
But of scale,
yeah.
Intel is probably the only one of huge scale.
And speaking of IBM, they just open sourced their Power 9, right? So that is now, it's open power, which is a very cool thing that they did, I think. I don't know a whole lot about it or what people are doing with it yet, but that Talos machine that I was looking at, the next generation of that chip, I believe is now on the path to being open sourced completely.
Do you require these to be patent free?
We don't have any requirements around patents.
Okay.
Typically, there's not a strong financial incentive for most of our projects to have patents. But if you want a patent, that's totally fine. Yeah. And we can't enforce, there are plenty of projects that, for example, that they don't want to share the actual layout, but they're happy to share the schematic and how to program it. And that's a pretty good bar for most people, right? Unless you're actually going to copy the literal hardware, you should be happy as a user being able to reprogram it and understanding how it works on a schematic level. If you do want to, but on the other hand, if it's something that is meant to be incorporated into some other design, then maybe you do want the layout, right? So, there are different levels of openness that we require for different projects. Cool. Yeah.
What caused the delay on the keyboard?
Oh, I run a company called Crowd Supply.
That
that is entirely the source. So that hasn't launched yet, it's literally actually it's in my bag. I have a Pocket Beagle in my bag because I'm using Pocket Beagle as the core of it. I've redesigned it 3 times because it takes me so long to do it that technology has gotten better, right? When I first had the idea, I was like, oh, if only there were an embedded Linux machine that I could just run this on, like with Python. Oh, that'll never happen. And then, 5 years later, it did. So we're, at the price point I needed. And actually, Pocket Beagle is uniquely suited for that. It's not just any embedded Linux machine. It's Pocket Beagle in particular because they do real-time control of GPIO, which is to say that Linux is pretty slow, actually. Not just, I know. No, from a hardware perspective, right, your latency is like 10 milliseconds, which...
From a real-time perspective,
right.
it is horribly slow.
We need much faster than that. And so they have a coprocessor that handles that part of it, but it still interfaces through some maybe device tree magic. I don't know what it is. So that allows me to flip pins and read pins quickly. Or that's the idea anyway.
You wrote in Python?
Yeah, the original software is written in Python called Plover, Plover, which is a type of bird. But it has some special meaning because it's the shortest, maybe it's the longest word. I don't remember. It's something, a stenographer would instantly oh yeah, that's clever. Yeah, I think it's the easiest to type or something like that. Yes.
Sweet.
Mirabai, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. Mirabai is my stenography. She's a professional stenographer, and this was really her idea, and I just helped her make the software. You can go to opensteno.org to find out more about all this. Somebody wrote a book teaching you how to do steno. There have been video games like Guitar Hero style video games to learn steno. It's pretty crazy what people have done with it. Yeah. So yeah, one day I'm going to actually finish it.
This may be a correct direction to the human-machine interface. Instead of giving us a mouse with a single finger input device, giving us something that's capable of much higher bandwidth. Yeah.
So I will come back and give a talk.
The keyboard tops at about 100 words a minute, 100 to 120 words a minute.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So steno.
But steno's 220 to 250, right?
Well, that's just to be certified.
Certified, yeah.
The world record, which is held by a guy named Mark Killings, I'm forgetting his last name now, is 360.
Wow.
So a very fluid conversation in English is about 180.
Wow.
And multiple people talking is, in a courtroom, that's why you need the 225, right?
Yeah.
Or in a deposition or whatever.
2 conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating work. I mean, I'm not a stenographer, and I can't even do it. I understand how it works in theory, but it takes a lot of practice. I think what I'm trying to sell people on is not just for professional stenographers. I think they'll pick it up because it's relatively cheap, but it's for coders and people who are at a keyboard all day, like probably most of us, where it's not like you need to type faster because typing faster doesn't help you really code. You don't want to code fast, really.
Well, you do.
Well, you do, but you should.
You got to be able to think about what you're coding before you type.
Yeah. So, but it just takes it out of the way, right? It's like, okay, it's like using an IDE, right? That's how I think of it. There are all these macros for boilerplate and all of that. It's just like that. It's just one huge macro language, and I think the cognitive load is about the same. Switching from QWERTY to like Dvorak, right? That it's several months of relearning how to type, and yeah, you get like a 10%, maybe slightly more boost in speed, and your RSI might go away because you just took it easy for a while and because it's slightly more efficient. But for that same effort, you could do steno, and maybe you're not typing quite as fast as you were after a few months, but the ceiling is so high that you'll probably never hit it, right? You're not going to hit 360. But imagine if you could type 200. That'd be amazing. Yeah. Okay, so that's a separate talk.
Sign him up, Michael.
Yeah. So thanks for coming. If you have any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a dream project.
Yeah. What is it?
That I am in no way qualified to actually build, but I would love to see someone else who is make.
What's that?
An open source, preferably also open hardware, refreshable Braille display.
Yeah. There are people who are working on that, actually. And in fact, there's one project that's super interesting, and it's in the pipeline right now. We're talking with him about it. He's blind. He's out of the, I want to say it's Philippines. I'm forgetting where he's from. I think it's the Philippines. And it is it's not a Braille reader, but it is like augmentation in many different ways for totally open source to assist blind people. Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, it's one of those projects that you're like, oh, this is just a pipe dream. It's probably just a napkin sketch. No, this guy actually made prototypes. They work. It's creating. I don't even think he has a name for it yet. So I need to look it up. But keep an eye out for that on CrowdSupply. It should be coming up in pre-launch at least fairly soon.
No pun intended.
What?
Keep an eye out.
Oh, yes.
Sorry. I'm going to be sensitive here. Keep a finger out for it.
Yeah. But I don't know of any Braille readers that are actually open source yet.
It's just that Braille displays tend to cost multiple thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna spend that much money on anything,
right.
I want to be able to have some level of control over how it works.
Yeah. So the steno crowd is in the very same boat, right? Their hardware costs thousands of dollars, their software costs thousands of dollars, their education around it costs thousands of dollars. It's totally locked down, and I think it's a great example of how a community can circumvent and make it better. So I'm sure there are people working on Braille displays. I just don't know who is yet.
I've seen a couple different projects, but they always seem to
source?
Die.
Yeah.
They're one person's pet project,
right.
And then they get bored or frustrated or takes them elsewhere.
Yep.
You want a 80-character single line type refreshable display? Is that what?
Preferably 80, but I'll take 40.
Okay, I just want to make sure I got the right technologies that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I've seen prototypes of things like that, but nobody's actually tried to bring it to market, which is a hard thing to do. But I think it's actually ripe for crowdfunding and open source because it is a fairly niche market. Once you've told one person about it, they'll tell other people about it, and quickly everyone will know about it who is a potential customer. And there will be the community there to support it, I think. So,
commercial market items start at $3,500.
That's a lot of money.
There's a comment from the chat room. I met a database developer once who was blind, said his users liked his forms because they were clean and efficient.
Yeah.
He used a Braille display.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the stenography community caters to the hearing impaired, right? Which is a different set of hurdles that they face on a daily basis. But yeah, for the website design was done by somebody hard of hearing, and they cater to that in their design. So yeah. Any other things? I'll stick around if you guys want to chat.
Well, thank you. That was extremely awesome. Years in the making.
Yeah, having like screen readers read C code is not a fun experience.
No. Yeah.